The year was 1887, and the Arizona Territory was burning under the worst drought anyone could remember. For 3 months straight, not a single drop of rain had fallen from the cloudless sky. The sun beat down mercilessly day after day, turning the once green grasslands into a cracked, dusty wasteland that stretched as far as the eye could see. Sam Mackenzie wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stood on the porch of his small ranch house, staring out at his dying cattle. The Scottish immigrant had come to America 15 years ago, with nothing but hope in his heart and calluses on his hands. He'd worked every day since then to build something of his own in this harsh but beautiful land. Now, watching his life's work slowly wither away, he felt that familiar knot of worry tightening in his stomach. His cattle, once strong and healthy, now wandered listlessly across the barren fields. Their ribs were starting to show through their dusty hides, and their eyes had that dull look that meant they were getting desperate for water. Sam had counted them again that morning. He'd already lost 12 head to the drought, and more were getting weaker by the day. The water situation was getting dangerous. The creek that had run behind his property for as long as anyone could remember had dried up completely 2 weeks ago. Now there was nothing left but a sandy ditch filled with cracked mud and the bones of dead fish. The well he dug near the house was down to just a few feet of murky water, and he knew it wouldn't last much longer. Sam wasn't the only one struggling. His nearest neighbor, old Pete Johnson, had stopped by 3 days ago to talk about the situation. Pete's face had been grim as he'd sat on the porch, his hat in his hands, talking about how his own water was running out. The two men had shared a bottle of whiskey and talked about what they might have to do if the rains didn't come soon. Neither wanted to say it out loud, but they both knew they might have to abandon their ranches and head back east. The worst part was the tension building between the ranchers. Everyone in the territory was getting desperate, and desperate people sometimes did desperate things. Just last week, there had been a confrontation over at Miller's Creek, where 2 ranchers had gotten into a fistfight over water rights. Sheriff Coleman had to ride out and break it up before someone got seriously hurt. The whole situation was like a powder keg waiting to explode, but Sam tried to stay positive. He'd survived hard times before. Growing up poor in Scotland had taught him that tough times don't last, but tough people do. Every morning he'd saddle up his horse, Thunder, and ride out to check on his cattle and look for any sign that his wells might be recovering. He'd also been exploring the eastern part of his property, near the rocky hills that marked the boundary of his land. He'd heard stories from other ranchers about hidden springs that sometimes appeared during droughts, and he figured it was worth a look that particular afternoon. The heat was so intense it seemed to shimmer in waves above the ground. Sam had been riding for about an hour, checking the dry creek beds and looking for any sign of water, when something caught his attention. It was a sound, faint but distinct, carried on the hot wind. At first he thought it might be one of his cattle in distress, but as he listened more carefully, he realized it sounded like a human voice. Following the sound, Sam guided Thunder carefully down a steep slope toward a rocky ravine he'd never explored before. The voice was getting clearer now, and he could tell someone was calling for help. His heart started beating faster as he approached the edge of the ravine and looked down. What he saw made his blood run cold. About 20 feet below, a young man was trapped beneath a fallen horse. The horse was clearly dead, and the man underneath was barely moving. From his clothing and the long black hair, Sam could tell he was Apache. In this part of Arizona, that meant trouble. The relationship between white settlers and the Apache tribes had been tense for years, with conflicts breaking out regularly over land and water rights. For a moment, Sam hesitated. Every instinct told him to be careful. Apache warriors were known to be fierce fighters, and there had been raids on settler properties in recent months. Some of his neighbors would have turned around and ridden away, thinking it was too dangerous to get involved. Others might have seen this as an opportunity to capture an enemy, but as Sam looked down at the trapped man, all he could see was another human being in desperate need of help. The man's leg was clearly broken, twisted at an unnatural angle beneath the dead horse. His lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration, and his dark eyes were clouded with pain and exhaustion. Sam could tell he'd been trapped there for quite some time, probably days. "Hold on," Sam called down in English, not sure if the man could understand him. "I'm coming down to help you." Getting down into the ravine was tricky. Thunder couldn't make the steep descent, so Sam had to tie him to a sturdy bush and climb down on foot, using the rocky outcroppings as handholds. By the time he reached the bottom, he was breathing hard and his clothes were torn from the sharp rocks. Up close, the situation looked even worse. The horse was a big animal, probably weighing close to 1,000 pounds, and it was pinning the young Apache's left leg completely. The man's breathing was shallow and rapid, and Sam could see that he was in shock from the pain and dehydration. "Easy there, friend," Sam said softly, kneeling beside the trapped man. "Let me see what I can do." The Apache looked up at him with a mixture of suspicion and hope. He tried to say something, but his voice was just a dry whisper. Sam realized the man probably hadn't had water in days. Without hesitation, Sam pulled out his canteen and held it to the man's lips. The Apache drank greedily, water running down his chin as he tried to take in as much as possible. Sam had to pull the canteen away several times to keep him from drinking too fast and making himself sick. "Take it slow," Sam said gently. "There's more where that came from." As the Apache drank, Sam studied the situation. The horse had fallen in such a way that simply pulling the man out wasn't going to work. He needed to find a way to move the dead animal, or at least shift its weight enough to free the trapped leg. Looking around the ravine, he spotted several sturdy branches that had been washed down by previous flash floods, working quickly. Sam gathered the longest and strongest branches he could find. Using them as levers, he managed to create a makeshift system to lift the horse's body just enough to pull the injured man free. It was backbreaking work in the blazing heat, and by the time he finished, both men were exhausted. The Apache's leg was badly broken, but Sam had some experience with injuries from his years of ranch work. He tore strips from his own shirt, too. Make bandages and use 2 straight branches to create a splint. The young man gritted his teeth and endured the pain without making a sound, which impressed Sam greatly. As Sam worked, he noticed the Apache watching his face intently, as if trying to memorize every detail. When their eyes met, the young man spoke a few words in his native language. Sam didn't understand the words, but the tone was clearly one of gratitude. "What's your name?" Sam asked, pointing to himself. Sam Mackenzie." The Apache understood the gesture and pointed to his own chest. "Nalnish," he said, his voice still hoarse from thirst. When the makeshift medical treatment was finished, Sam helped Nalnish slowly sit up against a large rock in the shade. He gave him more water and shared some dried beef from his saddlebags. As they sat together in the silence of the ravine, Sam couldn't help but think about how strange the situation was. Here he was, a Scottish immigrant rancher, sharing his precious water and food with an Apache warrior who, under different circumstances, might have been considered his enemy, but in that moment none of that seemed to matter. They were just 2 human beings helping each other survive in a harsh and unforgiving land. Sam woke up before dawn the next morning, just like he had every day for the past 15 years, but something felt different. The air was too quiet, too still. Even his rooster seemed hesitant to crow. As he pulled on his boots and walked to the window, he noticed Thunder pacing nervously in the corral, his ears twitching at sounds Sam couldn't hear yet. Then it hit him like a punch to the gut. A low, rumbling sound was growing steadily louder, coming from the east where the sun was just starting to peek over the rocky hills. It wasn't thunder from a storm. It was something that made his blood turn cold and his hands start to shake. Horses, lots of them. And they were heading straight for his ranch. Sam grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He'd heard stories from other ranchers about Apache war parties, how they could appear out of nowhere like ghosts and disappear just as quickly. Most of those stories didn't end well for the white settlers involved. Stepping out onto his wooden porch, Sam felt his legs go weak at the sight before him. At least 50 Apache warriors on horseback were spread out in a perfect half circle around his small ranch house. They sat completely still on their mounts like statues carved from stone, watching him with eyes that revealed nothing of their intentions. The morning sun caught the metal of their weapons and the colorful patterns on their clothing. Some carried traditional bows and arrows, others had rifles that gleamed in the early light. Their horses were magnificent animals, well-trained and alert, standing perfectly still despite the tension in the air. Sam had never seen such a display of organized strength up close, and it was both terrifying and impressive. At the center of the group sat a man who was clearly their leader. He was older than the others, with gray streaking through his long black hair, and he wore an elaborate headdress decorated with eagle feathers and intricate beadwork. Everything about him commanded respect and spoke of years of experience in leadership. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by lines that told stories of both wisdom and hardship. But what really caught Sam's attention was the familiar figure sitting on a horse next to the chief. It was Nalnish, the young Apache warrior Sam had rescued from the ravine just yesterday. His leg was still splinted and bandaged, but he sat tall and proud on his horse, his dark eyes fixed on Sam's face. Sam's mind raced as he tried to figure out what was happening. Had he made a terrible mistake by helping Nalnish? Was this some kind of trap? Maybe the Apache considered his help an insult, or perhaps they thought he had ulterior motives. Stories flashed through his memory of other settlers who had encountered Apache war parties, and most of those stories involved violence and death. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Sam could feel sweat running down his back despite the cool morning air. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his rifle steady. He was completely outnumbered and outgunned. His nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and even if someone heard gunshots, help wouldn't arrive in time to make any difference. Then the chief raised his right hand, and the gesture seemed to ripple through the entire group like a wave. Every warrior became even more still and focused, if that was possible. Sam held his breath, expecting the worst. Instead of an attack, Nalnish began to speak. His voice carried clearly across the space between them, speaking in rapid Apache to his chief. Sam couldn't understand the words, but he recognized some of the gestures as Nalnish was making. The young warrior was pointing to his splinted leg, then to Sam, then making motions that looked like drinking water. The chief listened intently, his weathered face showing no emotion. Occasionally he would nod or ask a brief question, but mostly he just listened. Sam found himself studying the older man's face, trying to read any sign of what might be coming next. Would they take him prisoner? Kill him outright? Burn down his ranch and steal his cattle? After what seemed like an eternity, the chief turned his attention to Sam. When their eyes met, Sam felt like he was being measured and weighed by someone who had seen enough of life to judge a man's character in a single glance. The chief's eyes were intelligent and alert, but also carried a sadness that spoke of losses and struggles Sam could only imagine. Slowly, carefully, the chief dismounted from his horse. Sam's grip tightened on his rifle, but something told him not to raise it. The chief walked forward with the steady, confident gait of a man who had never backed down from anything in his life. When he was about 20 feet away, he stopped and said something in Apache. Nalnish translated, his English halting but clear enough to understand. He says his name is Nach. He is nephew of great Chief Cochise. He comes to speak with the white rancher who showed kindness to Apache warrior. Sam felt his knees go weak with relief. They weren't here for revenge or to start a fight, at least not yet. He lowered his rifle and tried to keep his voice steady as he responded. Tell Chief Nach that Sam Mackenzie welcomes him to his land, he said, hoping he was following some kind of proper protocol. I only did what any decent person would do for someone in trouble. Nalnish translated again, and Sam noticed a slight change in the chief's expression. It wasn't quite a smile, but some of the stern intensity seemed to soften just a little. Nach spoke again, longer this time, his hands moving expressively as he talked. Chief says what you did was not small thing, Nalnish translated. You gave water when water is precious. You helped enemy when you could have left him to die. You asked for nothing in return. This is not usual way of white men in this land. Sam felt his face flush. He hadn't thought of his actions as particularly heroic or unusual. I just did what felt right, he said simply. The translation of his words seemed to have a significant effect on the chief. Nate nodded slowly and spoke at length to his warriors, who had been listening to every word of the exchange. Sam noticed that some of them were looking at him differently now, with what might have been curiosity rather than hostility. Then Chief Nate did something that completely shocked Sam. He reached into a leather pouch hanging from his belt and pulled out what looked like a piece of worked hide, folded carefully and tied with sinew. He held it out toward Sam, speaking as he did so. Chief says Apache people do not forget kindness, Nalmish translated. When man shows mercy to Apache, Apache shows mercy in return. This is old way, traditional way. You saved life of Tribal. Member, now Tribe owes debt to you. Sam walked slowly forward, still hardly believing what was happening. Just minutes ago, he had been certain he was about to die, and now an Apache chief was offering him some kind of gift. He accepted the folded hide with hands that were still trembling slightly. Chief says open it, Nalnish instructed. Sam carefully untied the sinew and unfolded the hide. What he saw inside made him gasp. It was a map, drawn with remarkable skill and detail, showing the landscape around his ranch. But it wasn't just any map. It showed the location of something that could save not just his ranch, but the entire territory from the devastating drought, hidden springs and underground water. Sources were marked with symbols Sam didn't recognize but somehow understood. The map showed a network of water that the Apache had known about for generations, secret sources that could mean the difference between life and death in this parched land. Chief Nate spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of a momentous decision, Nalnish translated with obvious emotion in his voice. Chief says this water has been Apache's secret for many generations. Tribal elders debated 3 days whether to share with white man. Your kindness to me changed their minds. But there is condition. Sam's hands trembled as he held the precious hide map, trying to process what was happening. Just yesterday he'd been worrying about losing everything to the drought, and now he was holding what looked like the answer to everyone's prayers. But the word condition hung in the air like a storm cloud, making him nervous about what might come next. Chief Nate stepped closer, his weathered face serious as he began to speak in Apache. His voice was deep and measured, like someone who had spent years making decisions that affected the lives of many people. Sam found himself holding his breath, waiting for Nalnish to translate words that could change everything. Chief says, "This water is sacred to Apache people," Nalnish began, his young voice carrying the weight of his leader's words. "For many generations, our grandfathers and grandmothers used these springs when great droughts came to the land. It kept our children alive when sky refused to give rain." Sam nodded, understanding the magnitude of what he was being offered. These weren't just random water sources. They were lifelines that had sustained an entire people through countless dry seasons. The fact that they were willing to share this knowledge with him was almost overwhelming, Nate continued speaking, gesturing toward the map in Sam's hands, then toward his own warriors, and finally toward the direction of town where other white settlers lived. His words came in careful, deliberate phrases, each one chosen with obvious thought. "Chief says water belongs to Earth Mother, not to any one man," Nalnish translated. "Apache learned this lesson long ago. When people try to own water, water disappears. When people share water, water flows forever." The old chief paused and looked directly into Sam's eyes. What Sam saw there wasn't the stern mask of a war leader, but something much more personal. It was the look of a man who had watched his own people suffer from thirst, who had buried children and elders when the rains failed to come. It was the look of someone who understood that water meant life itself. "You shared your water with Apache warrior when you had little to spare," Nalnish continued the translation. "This showed Apache elders that some white men understand old wisdom. But if we share our secret with you, you must become guardian of this wisdom." Sam felt his heart racing as the full meaning of the offer became clear. "What does that mean?" "Exactly?" he asked, His voice barely above a whisper, Chief Nate spoke again, this time pointing to different areas on the map and making gestures that included all the warriors around him, then sweeping his arm toward the horizon where other ranches lay scattered across the territory. These springs must be shared with all who need water, Nalnish explained. White settlers, Apache people, Mexican families, anyone who comes in peace. You will be keeper of the springs, but not owner. You make sure no one takes more than they need. You make sure no one fights over water. You make sure water stays clean and safe for all. The weight of the responsibility hit Sam like a physical blow. Chief Nate wasn't just offering him water. He was asking him to become a bridge between two worlds that had been at war for decades. He was being asked to take on a role that could easily get him killed by people on both sides who didn't understand or trust what he was trying to do. Chief says there is more, Nalnish added, his voice growing even more serious. If you accept this responsibility, you accept Apache protection. Any man who tries to harm you for sharing water will answer to Apache warriors. But also, if you break trust and try to claim water for yourself alone, Apache will take back the gift. Sam looked around at the 50 mounted warriors surrounding his ranch. These weren't just random fighters. They were disciplined, organized, and absolutely loyal to their chief. The protection they offered was real and valuable, but so was the threat if he failed to live up to their expectations. How do I know other settlers will accept this? Sam asked. Some of my neighbors don't trust Apache people. They might not want to share water that comes from Apache knowledge. Chief Nate listened to the translation and nodded as if he had expected this question. When he replied, there was something that might have been the ghost of a smile on his weathered face. Chief says drought makes all men equal, Nalnish translated. Thirsty man does not ask where water comes from. He only asks if water is clean and cold. When people are dying of thirst, they learn to put aside old Angers very quickly. The truth of those words hit Sam immediately. He thought about his neighbor Pete, who had been talking about abandoning his ranch just days ago. He thought about the Miller family, whose children were getting sick from drinking the muddy water at the bottom of their failing well. When people were desperate enough, they would accept help from anyone willing to offer it, but Chief Nate wasn't finished. He reached into another pouch and pulled out a small carved stone, smooth and polished from years of handling. He placed it carefully on top of the map in Sam's hands. This is talking stone, Nalnish explained. When there are problems with water sharing, you bring this stone to Apache camp. Chief will come to speak with all people involved. Stone means truce, no fighting while stone is present. Sam picked up the small stone, feeling its surprising weight and warmth. It was carved with symbols he didn't recognize, but somehow it felt important, significant in a way that went beyond its simple appearance. Chief wants to know your answer, Nalnish said quietly. Will you accept responsibility to be guardian of the waters? Will you make sure Apache and white settlers can both survive this drought? Sam looked up at the circle of mounted warriors, all waiting silently for his response. Then he looked at Chief Nate, whose weathered face showed the kind of patience that came from making life-and-death decisions for many years. Finally, he looked at Nalnish, the young warrior whose life he had saved just yesterday, and who had somehow convinced his people to trust a white stranger with their most precious secrets. The smart thing might have been to ask for time, to think it over, to consider all the dangers and complications. But Sam had grown up poor in Scotland, where his grandmother had taught him that when life offers you a chance to do good in the world, you don't hesitate. You step forward and do what needs to be done. I accept, Sam said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. I'll guard these water sources and make sure they're shared fairly with anyone who needs them. You have my word. Chief Nate nodded solemnly and spoke a few words in Apache. Immediately, all 50 warriors raised their right hands in what was clearly a gesture of respect and agreement. The sound of their voices joining together in what seemed to be a traditional chant sent chills down Sam's spine. When the chanting stopped, Chief Nate walked forward and placed his hand on Sam's shoulder. The gesture was brief but powerful. And Sam understood that he had just entered into an agreement that would change his life forever. Chief says first test will come soon, Nalish translated. Drought is getting worse. Other settlers will come looking for water soon. Some will be grateful, others will be suspicious. A few will be angry. How you handle first visitors will show Apache people if they chose the right guardian. As the Apache warriors began to turn their horses and prepare to leave, Sam realized that his quiet life as a simple rancher was over. He was now the keeper of secrets that could save lives, the guardian of resources that could prevent wars, and the bridge between two peoples who had been enemies for far too long, standing on his porch with the precious map and talking stone. In his hands, Sam watched the Apache riders disappear into the morning heat shimmer, knowing that everything had changed and there was no going back. Sam didn't have to wait long for his first test. 3 days after his meeting with Chief Nate, he was checking on his cattle when he spotted a dust cloud moving across the horizon. Someone was coming, and they were moving fast. As the cloud got closer, he could make out a wagon pulled by 2 exhausted horses, swaying dangerously as it bounced over the rough ground. The wagon finally came to a stop near his front porch, and Sam's heart sank when he saw who climbed down. It was Jake Miller, one of his neighbors from about 10 miles south. Jake was a hard man who'd made his feelings about Apache people very clear at town meetings. He was the kind of settler who believed the only good Apache was a dead Apache. And he'd been vocal about his opinion that white folks shouldn't trust any of them, but right now, Jake looked desperate. His clothes were dusty and stained with sweat. His face was sunburned and cracked, and his eyes had that wild look that came from too many sleepless nights. Behind him in the wagon, Sam could see Jake's wife Helen and their 3 young children, all of them looking sick and exhausted. "Sam," Jake called out, his voice hoarse and cracking. "Thank God you're here. We need help, and we need it bad." Sam walked over to the wagon, and what he saw made his stomach turn. The children were clearly suffering from dehydration. The youngest, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, was barely conscious. Helen was trying to comfort her, but she looked just as bad as the rest of them. "What happened, Jake?" Sam asked, already knowing he was about to face exactly the kind of situation Chief Nate had warned him about. "Our well went completely dry 2 days ago," Jake said, his voice breaking with emotion. "We've been rationing water for weeks, but now there's nothing left, nothing at all. The children started getting sick yesterday, and little Betty won't even wake up properly." Sam looked at the family again, and his heart went out to them. These were his neighbors, people he'd known for years. Whatever his differences with Jake's opinions about Apache people, these children didn't deserve to suffer for their father's prejudices. "I've got some water I can spare," Sam said carefully. "Let me get some for the children right away." He brought out his remaining water and watched as the family drank desperately. The children perked up almost immediately, and little Betty's eyes became more alert. But Sam knew this was just a temporary fix. They needed more water, and they needed it regularly until the drought broke. After the immediate crisis was handled, Jake pulled Sam aside. "Sam, I heard some strange rumors in town," he said quietly. "People are saying you made some kind of deal with the Apache. They're saying you know where to find water that nobody else knows about." Sam felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment Chief Nate had predicted, the first real test of whether he could handle being the guardian of the sacred springs. "What exactly are people saying, Jake?" "Look, I don't usually put much stock in gossip," Jake continued. "But I'm desperate here. My family is dying of thirst. If you know where there's water, I'm begging you to help us. I'll pay whatever you want. I'll sign over half my ranch if I have to." Before Sam could answer, another dust cloud appeared on the horizon. This one was moving more slowly, and as it got closer, Sam could see it wasn't a wagon. It was a group of people on foot, walking alongside a few horses. His heart started racing when he realized who they were. It was a small group of Apache women and children, led by an older woman who carried herself with obvious authority. Sam recognized one of the younger women as Nalish's sister, whom he'd met briefly when Chief Nate had visited. They were clearly as desperate for water as Jake's. Family had been. Jake saw them coming and immediately reached for the rifle in his wagon. "Apache," he said, his voice full of hatred. "Sam, get your gun. We can't let them get close to our families." "Put that gun down, Jake," Sam said firmly. "These are women and children, not warriors. And they're just as thirsty as your family?" "Was 10 minutes ago. Are you insane?" Jake hissed. "These people are savages. They'll kill us all the first chance they get." Sam could see the Apache group getting closer, and he noticed that the children with them looked just as sick and dehydrated as Jake's children had been. The older woman leading them was clearly struggling to keep going, but she was pushing forward with the kind of determination that only came from protecting family. This was it. This was the exact situation Chief Nate had described. Sam had to make a choice that would define not just his own future, but possibly the future of everyone in the territory. He could side with Jake and turn the Apache away, breaking his promise to Chief Nate and losing access to the sacred springs. Or he could try to bring these two desperate groups together, knowing it might end in violence. "Jake," Sam said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. I do know where there's water. Enough water to save both our families and theirs, but there's a condition." Jake's eyes lit up with hope, but his grip on his rifle didn't loosen. "What kind of condition?" "The water source I'm talking about has to be shared with everyone who needs it. White settlers, Apache families, anyone who comes in peace looking for help. No exceptions, no fighting, no trying to claim it for ourselves alone." "You want me to share water with Apache?" Jake asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "Sam, have you lost your mind? These people have been raiding settlers for years. They're our enemies." "Look at them, Jake," Sam said, pointing to the approaching group. "Really look at them. Do they look like raiders to you? They're mothers with sick children, just like your wife is a mother with sick children. The only difference is the color of their skin." The Apache group had stopped about 50 yards away, clearly unsure whether they should approach or retreat. Sam could see the older woman talking quietly to the others, probably trying to decide if it was safe to ask for help from the white settlers. "I won't do it," Jake said flatly. "I won't share anything with Apache. Find another way to get water. Or we'll find it ourselves." But then something happened that changed everything. Little Betty, Jake's youngest daughter, suddenly spoke up from the wagon. "Daddy," she said in a weak voice, "those children look sick like I was. Don't they need water too?" Helen, Jake's wife, looked up from where she'd been tending to their children. She glanced over at the Apache group and saw the same thing her daughter had seen: sick children who needed help. For a moment, her face showed the same prejudice her husband carried. But then her expression softened as her motherly instincts took over. "Jake," she said quietly, "they're just babies. Some of them can't be more than 2 or 3 years old." Sam saw his opportunity. "The water source I'm talking about is big enough for everyone," he said. "There's no need for anyone to go without. But if we're going to use it, we all have to agree to share it peacefully. That's the only way this works." Jake looked back and forth between his own sick children and the Apache children in the distance. Sam could see the internal battle playing out on his face. Years of prejudice and fear were fighting against his desperate need to save his family. Finally, Helen made the decision for him. She climbed down from the wagon and started walking toward the Apache group, her hands held out in front of her to show she wasn't carrying any weapons. "Helen, what are you doing?" Jake called after her. "What?" "Any mother would do," she replied without looking back. "I'm going to help some children who need water." Helen's brave walk toward the Apache group changed everything in that dusty clearing. Sam watched as she approached the older Apache woman, both mothers recognizing something universal in each other's eyes, without sharing a common language. They somehow communicated through gestures and expressions that only mothers could understand. The Apache woman, who Sam later learned was called Grandmother Moon by her people, gently touched Helen's arm and pointed to the sick children in both groups. Helen nodded and pointed back toward her own wagon, then made drinking motions with her hands. Within minutes, The two women had established a basic understanding that transcended years of tribal conflicts and settler fears. Jake stood frozen by his wagon, watching his wife do something he never thought possible. His rifle hung loose in his hands as he saw Helen help one of the Apache children who was struggling to walk. The little boy couldn't have been more than 3 years old, and he was so dehydrated that his lips were cracked and bleeding. "Sam," Jake said quietly, his voice shaking, "what have we become? When did we start seeing children as enemies?" Sam placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. "We became afraid, and fear makes people do terrible things. But it doesn't have to stay that way." By now, Helen and Grandmother Moon had brought all the children together in the shade beside Sam's house. The Apache women had shared some dried fruit from their pouches, while Helen had found some bread in her wagon. Watching children of different cultures sharing food and comfort with each other was more powerful than any speech about peace could have been. "All right," Jake said, finally setting down his rifle. "What do we need to do to get water for these kids?" Sam felt a wave of relief wash over him. This was exactly what Chief Nate had hoped would happen. When people were desperate enough, when children's lives were at stake, old hatreds had a way of melting away like snow in spring sunshine. "Follow me," Sam said, pulling out the sacred map Chief Nate had given him. "But remember what I told you. This water belongs to everyone who needs it. We share it fairly, we keep it clean, and we never fight over it." The journey to the hidden spring took about an hour, with the group moving slowly to accommodate the weakened children. Sam led them through rocky terrain that most people would have passed by without a second glance. But the Apache map was incredibly detailed, showing landmarks and natural formations that guided them to places no white settler had ever seen. When they finally reached the spring, everyone stopped and stared in amazement. Hidden in a natural cave behind a screen of desert bush was a pool of clear, cold water that seemed to glow in the filtered sunlight. The sound of gently flowing water was like music after months of silence from dried creek beds and empty wells. The children ran forward immediately, Apache and white children alike, laughing and splashing as they drank their fill for the first time in weeks. Their joy was infectious, and soon even the adults were smiling despite their exhaustion. But the real magic happened over the next few hours as the two families worked together to set up a temporary camp near the spring. Jake found himself helping Apache women gather firewood, while Helen and Grandmother Moon collaborated on preparing a meal using ingredients from both families. The language barrier seemed less important as people communicated through actions and shared purpose. That evening, as they sat around a small campfire, Jake did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood up and walked over to where Grandmother Moon was sitting with her grandchildren. "Ma'am," he said awkwardly, not sure if she could understand English, "I want to apologize for the way I've thought about your people. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Grandmother Moon studied his face for a long moment, then said something in Apache to one of the younger women who translated. "She says fear makes all people do foolish things," the translator explained. "But wise people learn to put children's needs before old Angé. She says you are becoming wise." The next morning brought visitors that Sam had been expecting. Chief Nate arrived with a small group of warriors, including Nalnish, to check on how the first sharing of the sacred spring was going. Sam felt nervous as he watched the chief survey the mixed camp of Apache and white families, but Chief Nate's weathered face showed what might have been approval as he observed children playing together while their mothers worked side by side to prepare breakfast. He spoke quietly with Grandmother Moon, who seemed to be giving him a detailed report of everything that had happened. Finally, Chief Nate approached Sam with Nalnish translating. "Chief says the spirits of the water are pleased," Nalnish explained. "When Apache children and white children drink from same source without fighting, it shows water will flow strong for many seasons." But the chief also had practical news. "More settlers are coming," Nalnish continued. "Chief's scouts have seen 3 more families heading this way. Word is spreading about the water. Some come in peace, but others may come with greed in their hearts." Sam nodded, understanding the challenge ahead. What should I do if people try to claim the spring for themselves or refuse to share? Chief Nate reached into his pouch and pulled out the talking stone Sam had seen before, plus something new, a simple wooden staff decorated with both Apache symbols and carved letters that spelled out peace in English. Plant this staff by the water, Nalnish translated. It shows all people that this is neutral ground. Apache warriors will watch from distance. If anyone tries to break peace or steal water, they will answer to Chief Nate. Over the following weeks, the hidden spring became exactly what Chief Nate had envisioned. Word spread throughout the territory about the miraculous water source where Apache and settlers could come together safely. Families arrived desperate and afraid, but they left with full water barrels and new understanding about their neighbors. Sam found himself becoming a different kind of leader than he'd ever imagined. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was a mediator, a protector, and a bridge between worlds. Some days were harder than others. There were still people on both sides who couldn't let go of old hatreds. But gradually, the spring became a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict. Jake and his family became regular visitors, and Jake himself became one of Sam's most trusted helpers in managing the water sharing. Helen and Grandmother Moon developed a friendship that transcended language, teaching each other traditional remedies and child-rearing techniques. Years later, when Sam was an old man with gray in his beard, he would often sit by the spring inn the evenings and watch children play. Apache kids and settler kids would chase each other around the rocks, their laughter echoing off the cave walls. Their parents would share stories and trade goods, creating relationships that helped keep peace in the territory for generations. The drought eventually ended, as all droughts do, but the connections forged during those desperate months lasted much longer. The spring continued to flow, and people continued to share it, passing down the story of how one man's simple act of kindness to a wounded stranger had changed the destiny of an entire region. Naalanize, who had grown into a respected leader among his people, would sometimes visit Sam at the spring. The two men, now old friends, would sit together in comfortable silence, watching the next generation learn the lessons their cooperation had made possible. You know, Sam would say to Nalnish during these visits, I never imagined that sharing a drink of water could lead to all this. Nalnish would smile and reply in his improved English, Apache people have old saying, kindness is like water. It always finds way to flow where it is needed most. And indeed, the kindness that started with one rancher sharing his canteen had flowed far beyond anything Sam could have dreamed, creating streams of understanding that would nourish the land and its people for generations to come.